Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Gregory Wilbert, joining you from Quito, Ecuador. A judge in Madrid, Spain, ordered the arrest of former members of the Catalan regional government on Thursday. Catalan independence supporters immediately took to the streets to demand their release, calling them political prisoners. Additionally, a Spanish prosecutor has asked for international arrest warrants for four more regional officials, including Catalan President Carles Puidgemont, who currently are in Belgium. The arrest warrants were issued in response to the Catalan government's declaration of independence last week, to which the government of Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy responded by taking over the regional government and convoking new parliamentary elections in Catalonia for December 21st. Joining me to analyze the most recent developments in Spain is Sebastiaan Faber. Sebastiaan is professor of Hispanic Studies at Oberlin College and author of the forthcoming book, Memory Battles of the Spanish Civil War. He joins us from Madrid, Spain. Welcome, Sebastiaan.
Great to be here.
So, as I mentioned in my introduction, 8 members of the regional cabinet are in prison at the moment, including its vice president, Oriol Junqueras, and 1 cabinet member is out on bail. Meanwhile, thousands of supporters of independence took to the streets again. How are people responding in Catalonia and in the rest of Spain to these developments? Are they angry, resigned, or what? What's going on?
The supporters of the independence movement are very angry, but more broadly, everybody who has said and who has thought that Madrid's way of handling the situation was the wrong one is extremely angry. The reactions here in Madrid are people throwing up their hands and saying, this is a disaster, this should have never happened. The Madrid government is defending this situation by saying, hey, these are the courts are independent, and if an independent judge decides to put these people in prison because she believes that the charges against them hold water, and she believes that not putting them in prison risks them fleeing or destroying evidence, which are the arguments that are being put forth. The government is saying, hey, if that's the judge's call. But there are at least 3 ways in which this is a very questionable decision. One is that it's not clear at all, in fact, it's quite unclear, that the national criminal courts to which the judge belongs that just put these people in prison, that's the right court to handle these charges. The people, the cabinet members and the vice president are being charged of rebellion, sedition, and misuse of funds. And the act of rebellion, for example, there's jurisprudence that says explicitly that the National Criminal Court is not the one dealing with acts of rebellion, for example. So the first real question is this even the right court? Secondly, there's a broad doubt about judicial independence in Spain, especially at the national level. And third, it's entirely unclear whether the charge of rebellion specifically, as it was filed by the Attorney General and confirmed by the judge, makes any sense at all. By Spanish legal code, rebellion has to include some measure of violence. And anybody who's been watching the independence movement in Catalonia can say many things about it, but not that it has been violent.
So what's next now? Will Puigdemont and the remaining members of his cabinet surrender and go to prison? And if so, how likely is it that they would be convicted for rebellion? You mentioned it's the wrong type of court. I mean, what is this court where they're currently being judged? Would it be more likely to hand down a sentence, the maximum sentence of 30 years, or would they have better chances in the proper court that you mentioned?
I don't know what the judge will eventually decide. I think for this particular moment, we're a month and a half away from these elections that have been called for December 21st. This decision to put them in prison for now, pending their actual their trial, is completely poisoning what was already basically a poisoned atmosphere leading up to these elections, which were called, after all, by the central government after it had overtaken and revoked the self-government of Catalonia. Your question about Puigdemont and the other cabinet members in Brussels, it's really now up to a Belgian court to decide whether they should be whether they should be extradited to Spain. So one of the theories circulating about Puigdemont and his cabinet members fleeing or moving to Brussels is, on the one hand, they're internationalizing the conflict. They're they're fleeing to what is basically the capital of the European Union, but they're also slowing down the process because more hoops have to be jumped through by the different courts to get them into Madrid to be questioned by the court in Madrid.
And so, turning to the elections, you mentioned Prime Minister Rajoy had called for them to be held on December 21st. And from what I've heard, the Catalan president, Carles Puidgemont, has said that he would respect these elections, which seems a bit surprising, perhaps. But first, what is the makeup of the current parliament? And secondly, how likely is that a new election would change the balance of forces in that regional parliament?
The current makeup of the parliament is such that the parties that ran on a pro-independence program, either as part of a coalition called Together for Yes or separately, which is the case of the far-left CUP party, those parties hold a majority of seats, an absolute majority of seats in the Catalan parliament, even though at the last elections in 2015, they did not quite win the majority of the popular vote. If elections were held normally on December 21st, polls indicate that the same proportion may well repeat itself, or the parties in favor of independence may be able to increase their representation. And decisions like the ones we saw coming down today are so polarizing and mobilizing in Catalonia that that's not unlikely that the support for pro-independence parties will increase. So there's a way in which the elections for December 21st, which by Madrid and some others are justified as a reset to start over again, to bring the system back to normal functioning, may end up repeating the exact same problem. Interestingly, in the justification, the decision that was published today by the court, the decision by which the vice president and the cabinet members were sent to prison, the court basically the judge goes back to the initial electoral program with which the parties presented themselves to the elections as one of the indicators of their guilt of trying to secede from Spain, and that the attempt of secession is construed as anti-constitutional, as illegal, and as an act of rebellion.
So actually, also turning to a little bit more back in terms of how did this all come about, Catalan Vice President Oriol Junqueras had an op-ed article in the New York Times on Wednesday. And one of the things that he wrote was that Catalans are so interested in independence because the central government of Spain has been overturning one initiative from Catalonia after the other. He wrote, let me just read a section. He said, the Spanish government has handed down arbitrary and capricious decisions. The Constitutional Court has suspended every one of the initiatives of the Catalan government. Whether the issues involve gender equality, energy, the economy, everything has been cut down at the behest of the Popular Party government in Madrid. This argument sounds like this conflict also has something to do with a left-right kind of political conflict. Would you say, is that a fair assessment, that in other words, the government of Catalonia has been trying to push through more progressive measures that the central government, which is conservative, wouldn't allow?
What Junqueras writes is true. I think it'd be a stretch to argue that the pro-independence movement is itself a progressive movement. The pro-independence movement is very mixed politically. It has a progressive content for sure, a progressive strain, as well as a fairly radical strain, but it also has a very conservative strain. So I think what Junqueras was trying to do in the op-ed piece in the Times was in part to make it seem as if this is the struggle of a progressive movement against a repressive central government. But that's not in fact the case. I think a more sophisticated reading of the situation would say that both a big chunk of the pro-independence movement and the government in Madrid are basically resisting change. So there's a way in which the conservative party in Catalonia has tried to rally the pro-independence energies and frustration with the Madrid government, with the central government in Madrid, has tried to challenge that discontent, in part for its own political survival. And there's a curious way in which Puigdemont and Junqueras are now seen as champions of progressive causes and presenting themselves as champions of progressive causes, when it was their parties, in part, at least this is very much true for Puigdemont, who in the wake of the 2008-2009 recession pushed through harsh austerity measures and has consistently always in terms of its political priorities, privileged order and business and helped erode social services, social healthcare, et cetera, and education. So the attempts to present this conflict as the conflict between a progressive movement and a repressive government is not quite the whole picture.
Okay, and in an earlier interview that we had with you last week, I think, you mentioned that a more likely scenario out of this impasse between Catalonia and the central government in Spain would be via new elections for Spain's central government. Just how stable is the Rajoy government at the moment? He and his allies currently actually have a minority in parliament, but the Socialist Party abstained during the vote for prime minister last year and allowed Rajoy to win. Could this crisis, in other words, cause Rajoy to fall because he doesn't have a majority?
I would say the crisis has strengthened his position. Maybe his most important coup, his most important win through this whole process, has been the fact that the Socialist Party, which is still the largest opposition party, has completely buckled to the pressure that the Partido Popular, the Popular Party, and Rajoy's party has applied to it in the framework of this crisis. So, for example, when last Friday the Spanish Senate voted to revoke Catalonia's self-government, invoking Article 155 of the Spanish Constitution, it had the full support of the Socialist Party. So there's a way in which Rajoy has very smartly, I guess, politically, been able to take advantage of this crisis to drive a stake in the heart of the opposition, or a wedge dividing the opposition. The second largest opposition party in Spain is Podemos. Podemos has not been in favor of invoking Article 155 and has, from the beginning, defended an official binding referendum in Catalonia about self-determination to come out of this crisis. But the conflict has managed to further divide the Socialist Party from Podemos, and making it even less likely that they would ever come together under current conditions in the Spanish Parliament to form a majority government that would take the place of the minority government that Rajoy is currently in charge of.
Okay, well, we'll continue to keep an eye on the developments there. And I was joined by Sebastiaan Faber. Sebastiaan is professor of Hispanic Studies at Oberlin College. He joined us from Madrid, Spain. Thanks again, Sebastiaan, for talking to us about this.
Absolutely.
And thank you for watching the Real News Network.